This week in Sci-Fi, we've got our eye on Sydney's own Sci-Fi Film Festival kicks off. Star Trek's Dirty Laundry gets aired. And next month is a big one for sci-fi fans. December is looking great for sci-fi fans with new shows dropping throughout the month. Lost in Space Season 3 hits Netflix globally December 1. The trailer promises an epic conclusion, and yes, this is officially the last season in the series. But with sci-fi, we know that the end isn't always the end. Also in its final season is The Expanse, back on Amazon Prime December 10. Only 6 episodes are planned, and while we were promised a satisfying conclusion this season, the showrunner has hinted that there may be scope to continue in some form. The series has been cancelled once by Sci-Fi, but that was until Amazon resurrected it. But it remains to be seen how strong those prospects are following the controversy around Kaz Anvar's departure. Post-apocalyptic drama Station 11 will launch on Stan December 17. It's being described as sci-fi drama, but we're not 100% sure if we agree. The series is based around a major pandemic, and as we know, that whole thing has become very much science fact. And Star Wars fans haven't been forgotten, with live-action series The Book of Boba Fett coming to Disney Plus globally December 29. In this series, the bounty hunter turns overlord, seeking to tighten his grip on the criminal empire left behind by Jabba the Hutt. Boba promises a new era of respect, but it doesn't look like we'll have to wait too long for some old-fashioned head-crushing.
If you had spoken such insolence to Jabba, he'd have fed you to his menagerie.
The second Sydney Science Fiction Film Festival begins this week, with 19 features and 77 short films from Australia and around the world. The festival opens at the Actors Centre Australia on November 11 with the Australian premiere of Sundance hit The Blazing World, a cult film in the making full of dark secrets and vivid imagery. The festival has a hybrid format, with a virtual fest already underway for anyone outside of New South Wales. Films are available online until November 25, including fan-made virtual exclusives Attack of the Cat People, which is a tribute to early sci-fi classics, and Lockdown, which, as well as being topical, has a Doctor Who theme. The festival program is available at the website. A new trailer has been released for disaster epic Moonfall, which drops an important part of the plot: how the moon falls. It turns out the moon is actually hollow and there's some kind of vast technology packed inside, something that was first discovered by Apollo 11 in the 60s but hushed up. It looks like our heroes find a way inside the moon to deal with the menace.
No, we are just inside the moon.
That might be the greatest sentence anyone's ever said.
Very reminiscent of Independence Day. In that movie, the bad guys were defeated by a computer virus. Will that work again? Members will be voting on the most likely knockout blow in this week's poll, and we'll share the results next week. A new documentary to celebrate Star Trek's 55th anniversary has been released on the History Channel in the US. Called Center Seat, the 10-part series promises a deep dive into the iconic show's history, including all new behind-the-scenes details. And while all docos promise this, it looks like this one might actually deliver.
They offered me less money for Star Trek 3 than Star Trek 2.
I waved goodbye in the camera.
And I went, oh, I think I'm done. I think I have to move on from the show.
I said to my agent, get me out of this contract, get me off the show.
We haven't seen much of the captain so far, although William Shatner and Patrick Stewart have been busy lately, and Avery Brooks apparently doesn't do interviews. Even the documentary's director has become part of the story, making his disdain for the most recent series clear in an interview. We were waiting until we had an Australian release for this, but it just got way too interesting. We'll keep you updated. Last week's show covered the recent Saturn Awards, the Science Fiction, Fantasy and Horror Academy's answer to the Oscars. The results weren't without their controversy though. Skywalker only made it into this year's awards because the eligibility period was extended due to COVID, and concerns have been raised that the awards are too oriented to mainstream franchises like Star Wars, Star Trek, and Marvel. This week's members' poll asked whether the Saturn Awards had got it right. And the biggest single vote was in support of the choices made by the judges. But overall, most members felt there was an issue, in particular Skywalker's inclusion in judging and whether Discovery or Studio Mate Picard should have won Best TV Series. Joining me now to discuss the poll results and the rest of the Sci-Fi Week is Sydney Science Fiction Film Festival Director Simon Foster. Thanks for joining us, Simon.
Raymond, it's a pleasure to be here, mate. Thank you for having us. An incredible setup you've got here. I was so amazed when I came through the door, so thanks for having me.
That means a lot because you've seen a lot of sci-fi, so...
That's true, and this is right up there with most of it.
Now, speaking of sci-fi, the Saturn Awards just happened, and do you think that the Saturn Awards got it right? Because, Skywalker won Best Film and Star Trek Discovery won Best TV Series. Do you think that was the right move?
I think it was a safe move on their part. I think they're part of a much bigger industry and they need to be sort of conscious of who they're giving the awards to and how that's going to play with the wider sci-fi community. They're in a tough position because I think it helps the Saturn Awards and the organising body to have very high-profile titles. And this is something that doesn't just impact the Science Fiction Awards or Saturn Awards, it also sort of impacts award bodies all around the world. Are they the two best bits of science fiction we've seen all year? No, they're not. But I do understand why the Saturn Awards had to go down that path. There's a fine line you have to walk as an awards organisation to be respectable but also commercial.
Mm. And the results didn't really sit well with our members either because we did a poll to find out what their thoughts were and they kind of agreed as well that it was, mainstream is kind of get the popular vote with the Saturn Awards. Do we need to rely on film festivals to kind of see the independent and the better content?
Yes, that's something that we take on as part of the Sydney Science Fiction Film Festival. We try to have a more eclectic range of science fiction for the public to watch and for audiences and critics to be party to, because the distribution model for niche cinema and niche content like science fiction or horror or the like makes it very difficult for a lot of these films to be seen. So ideally the Saturn Awards could certainly cater for the most commercial elements of science fiction, which they clearly have done this year, but then they should certainly have something like an independent award, Independent Spirit Award, or New Vision Award, or Student Filmmaker Award, something that I think gives a broader overview of what the science fiction storytellers out there are doing.
And from what I know, the Sydney Science Fiction Film Festival does have accolades as well, where it does celebrate actors.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
The Sydney Science Fiction Film Festival is a very sort of broad umbrella term for so many different types of speculative storytelling. We have fantasy films in there, a film like Vera de Verdad, which is about soul transference, or we have Glass House, which is about a family living inside a glass house while a mind-shredding sort of plague takes place outside. So there's all these different elements that play into all the different types of sci-fi, and we're very supportive of new filmmakers and student filmmakers, short filmmakers, filmmakers from countries that don't often get exposure at festivals and certainly get no exposure through the mainstream cinema chains or anything like that. So yeah, with our festival we are trying to sort of fly the flag for slightly more left of centre science fiction storytelling, and that can be a problem when you're trying to sell tickets or trying to get media coverage, but it is sort of true to the broad sort of speculative storytelling culture that's out there. And
do you think that the studios should be investing more in new sci-fi stories that haven't been told on the screen before?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Some of my favourite films of the last few years, films like Prospect, which I screened at a festival I was programming a couple of years ago. These were smaller, independently shot films that have incredible look and feel to them. Clearly the work of an auteur with a strong personal vision, both as a storyteller and as someone working within the science fiction sphere. So yes, studios and money men and producers should look harder and try more to promote filmmakers with fresh visions. That space is been taken up a little bit by the streaming platforms, the Netflixes and the Amazons and so on. You know, in the last week or so, we've seen, although it was made for theatrical release, we've seen Finch with Tom Hanks turn up on Apple, Foundation, Invasion, both on Apple TV, the whole range of stuff, if you dig deep into Netflix, that are allowing filmmakers and storytellers to challenge the form and the content, but it's not getting a big screen release. And you can probably tell by looking at me, I'm an old man and I like to see things up on the big screen, and to be really immersed in those sort of stories on a full cinema screen.
And what do we need to do in Australia to kind of encourage that, to see more Australian sci-fi films on the big screen or on our screens?
Because our industry is so governed by the almighty dollar, we need government support. We need fantasy and science fiction storytelling conferences and conventions to unite the community that embraces this type of storytelling, and to be fostered from the very base sort of script development level right through to production. We need quotas put on the major streaming platforms so they support not just science fiction or that sort of storytelling, but Australian production across the board. The government needs to start listening to the Screen Producers Association to make the creative community and all of those that have suffered as part of the creative community through COVID. It needs to be turned around very quickly, and it needs government support to do that. And if there's any sort of benefactors out there who want to weigh in with large investments of cash to get this sort of groundswell off the ground and to have these sort of filmmakers making... See, I'll sidetrack here just briefly, because these films sell overseas. These are films that, because of all the many different streaming platforms and avenues for revenue at the moment around the world, these kind of films and TV series move really well. We've got a film as part of our festival called Risen, which was a very tough shoot, an independent film shot largely here in Sydney, but ultimately a little bit in Canada as well. Took him 4 years to get made, but he stuck to his vision. A young director called Eddie Araya, young Afghan filmmaker who sort of came over here and was passionate about this story and committed a huge part of his sort of last half decade to getting it made. And it's now topped like $1 million in pre-sales around the world and in box office in some territories and streaming platforms in other territories. And he's done that all off his own back. So what people need to realise is that give these independent filmmakers a platform, give them the money to do what they want to do. Some will fall in a heap. Some will have huge investment returns. We just need the dollars to make that happen.
Now, you seem like the right guy to ask this question, but what makes good sci-fi these days?
Well, I'm glad you asked. No. Yes, what makes good sci-fi? Well, I can answer that from the perspective of a festival director or a film critic, which I also do, or as a film goer, just originality. There's the old adage that there's really only 5 or 6 different stories in the world and it's just the way you tell them that makes it different is very kind of true. But just the original visions that and originality that I think sort of makes for a great viewing experience is what I look for in films. And it's strange because as a young man, I sort of was in the era of the crazy sort of VHS boom years, and I would go and get the horror films and the science fiction because I wanted that visceral rush of seeing those kind of genre films. And then I went through the serious film watcher stage and I started to write for SBS, and I was watching all these black and white Polish documentaries and thinking how important I was. And they're all wonderful films and I still watch those films. But I've come back to science fiction and to horror and to fantasy because there's so much originality and thematic richness in the genre storytelling at the moment. It's just what I react to most, both with my eyes and I guess with my heart when I'm watching these movies. It's why we got nearly 220 submissions this year from around the world, and I had no trouble sitting through most of them. No, all great films, believe me. Keep sending your submissions in, but yes, just some extraordinary visions.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Oh, my absolute pleasure, and congratulations again on what you're doing here. It's a fantastic setup.
In next week's poll, we're asking members to predict how the Hollow Moon bad guys are defeated in Moonfall. To vote, sign up for free Endeavour Mission membership. Find out more at endeavour.tv. And that was the Week in Sci-Fi. Until next week, Stay up to date at ionsci-fi.com.